This is the story of the one. As head of maintenance at a concert hall, he knows the show must always go on. That's why he works behind the scenes, ensuring every light is working, the HVAC is humming, and his facility shines. With Grainger's supplies and solutions for every challenge he faces, plus 24/7 customer support, his venue never misses a beat. Call quickgrainger.com or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
With Robinhood, not only can you trade individual stocks and ETFs, you can also seamlessly buy and sell crypto at low costs. Trade all in one place. Get started now on Robinhood. Trading crypto involves significant risk. Crypto trading is offered through an account with Robinhood Crypto LLC. Robinhood Crypto is licensed to engage in virtual currency business activity by the New York State Department of Financial Services. Crypto held through Robinhood Crypto is not FDIC insured or SIPC protected. Investing involves risk, including loss of principal. Securities trading is offered through an account with Robinhood Financial LLC, member SIPC, a registered broker-dealer.
Hey everyone, welcome back to my podcast, Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit. This is your host, Dr. Steve Sullivan, coming to you from Bucks County, Pennsylvania, just outside of Philadelphia. And that's where I've been teaching anatomy and physiology since 2002. We're in the home stretch for the A&P content on this podcast, and then we'll switch gears to the clinical, discussing common diseases, conditions, and injuries. Actually, maybe we'll even get into some interesting but not so common maladies. Once again, thank you for listening. It is great to have you aboard. And if you're liking this podcast and haven't already, please take the time to rate and review the show on whatever podcast app you're using. I would really appreciate it. And if you're new and this is your first episode, you should go back to episode 1 and start from there, because this podcast goes in order of a traditional anatomy and physiology 2-semester course. And all the topics build on each other. So it's really kind of hard to understand some of them if you don't have the background first. Also, just a reminder that I have an all-digital textbook alternative course resource called Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite, published by McGraw-Hill Education. It's not something you can use on your own. This is something your instructor would choose, like your textbook, and set up and assign. It has 165 assignable tutor videos that I've made, complete with adaptive learning questions to test your knowledge, cadaver dissection and physiology lab simulations, a bulleted narrative study guide for A&P, and question banks for homework practice, quizzes, and exams, with over 6,000 questions. So if your instructor is not using A&P Digital Suite, let them know about it. And a real special thanks to Dr. Beth Kirsten down at State College of Florida. She is a huge help for A&P Digital Suite, putting together a lot of the narrative study guides that go with the tutor videos. Today we're going to finish the female reproductive system with oogenesis, folliculogenesis, and the ovarian and menstrual cycles. But first I have a special treat for everyone. Recently I spoke with anatomy professor Dr. Paula Benad of Florida International University in Miami, or as you may know her from Instagram and TikTok, Witty Anatomy. She has almost 500,000 followers on Instagram where she posts clips from her lectures, quizzes, tips, funny stuff, and more. It's so much fun to watch. She has an amazing story and lots of good tips for A&P students. So please join me now for my conversation with the absolutely incredible, infinitely energetic at Witty Anatomy, Dr. Paula Benad. All right, thank you for joining me, Dr. Paula Benad from Florida International University, and you might know her as Witty Anatomy on Instagram. Thank you so much.
Thank you for inviting me. It's such a great pleasure to be here.
Well, I've been a huge fan of yours on social media for a really long time. I love all the stuff you do. You are so engaging. You're so energetic. You're so enthusiastic in your classroom. You can see how much your students love being in your class. And that's really inspiring for someone like me. Even though I've been teaching A&P for 23 years, it's still super inspiring to see someone who's doing it as well as you are and someone who loves your students so much. That's really great. So I'm super excited to have you.
The pleasure is all mine.
To start off, for those of my listeners who don't see you on Instagram, and I will be posting links to every way that students could see you and listeners can see you so they can do that. But for those of you who don't, could you give us a little bit about your personal and academic background and how you got into teaching anatomy and physiology?
Yes. So I am from Brazil and I did my bachelor's in biology. It's from Brazil, Universidade Federal de Santa Maria. And in the same university, I got my master's degree. And when I was doing my master's, which is in physiology, there was this opening to teach at the university. It was a position that everyone in the country could apply for. I was very young and I just had finished my bachelor's. I was at the beginning of my master's and I was like, well, I have nothing to lose. Let me apply, right? And then I applied. And even though there were people with PhD degrees trying for the same position, they selected me due to the way I was teaching, right? So it was very interesting because I just decided to apply. Let me learn from this experience. I'm all about let me learn about what's happening in my life. What is this opportunity bringing, right? So I got selected and I had this position to teach physiology. And the funny part was that I was teaching medical school students, dentistry, physical therapy, pharmacy, and I was younger than my students. So it was interesting that moment. So I always loved physiology, and then for me to do a good job teaching physiology, I had to learn anatomy. There is no way you can teach physiology well without knowing anatomy well. And I learned anatomy. So I came to the United States to do my PhD. And then I moved to UM. So I did my PhD at FIU, the university that I'm teaching now. I moved to UM to do a postdoc, which is University of Miami. And during my postdoc, I felt that something was missing. During my PhD, I was also teaching, but during my postdoc, I was not teaching. And I felt like I was not complete. And then appeared this position to teach human anatomy at FIU. And I was like, let me apply to see, right? I really love being a scientist. I was developing drugs, so cancer immunotherapy, targeted drugs. But I felt something was missing. So I applied for this position and I got selected to teach human anatomy. So that's how I end up back at FIU. And since then, it has just been an amazing ride. I really love teaching. I love working with the students, helping them learn, seeing them learning just makes my day.
Well, seeing online what you're like in the classroom, I'm not at all surprised that you were selected for that position. The story you tell is very similar to mine. When I started teaching, I was 29 years old and I was teaching at night in the community college. So most of my students were older than I was at the time. You got to find a way to make those boundaries very clear between you and your students.
Do you know how old I was? I was around 22.
Wow.
I was so
young.
Because I started the bachelor's when I was 17. So I finished it with 21 and I started my master's right away. So I was between 21 and 22. I was really young.
Wow, that's really young. So speaking of your social media content, which I think is really, really impressive, I love watching the clips of you in class. Sometimes you post quizzes, which are really neat. And then I also see, especially recently, you are so in love with your students and talking about them graduating and how proud you are of them. It's really, really fun to see. And I'm kind of curious, what started you with social media? Like what inspired you to start putting your teaching in social media and then build such a strong following? You've got like almost 500,000 Instagram followers.
Yes, it's true. Do you know who inspired me? My students.
Of course.
So it turned out that during COVID, we had to teach remotely, right? So FIU had these live sessions that my course that was face-to-face, I used to teach via Zoom in my apartment and my students in their specific houses. And I had 300 students, 288 students every semester. So we used to meet via Zoom. And the semester started was specifically spring 2021. I'll never forget it. And I come to the screen and then I say, good morning. And they all jump right? It's like, what's going on? What is happening? I was like, okay, this is really running differently from now on. It's not what you expected. We are doing this together. And I taught the same way I basically teach face to face. And that impressed them, and they were so excited. They used to tell me, like, I was never expecting to want to come to class, especially via Zoom. I would always put it on and stay sleeping, or I would always just fake that I was there, right? They turn off the cameras. We could not obligate the cameras to have the students to have the cameras on, and so on. But they were there because they did not have any other option. They had to submit written answers. They had to submit the polls for the multiple choice questions. So like 1 month in of us together, they started telling me, you need to open social media accounts. I was like, guys, I'm really not built for that. No, you need to. We will help you. I just have my personal accounts. I post like maybe 3 times a year. I don't even know how to do it. We will teach you everything. Just do it. We are 100% sure. Just count on us with anything you need. And I was like, I talked to my husband, should I? Because I have a specific personality that if I decide I'm doing something, I need to do the best I can. And I knew that if I decided to do the social media, I would do the best I could do. And my husband said, well, you don't have anything to lose. And your students, they are basically, they are your whole profession, and they are asking you to do it because they learn so much from you. So why don't you try? And then I tried. And it turned out that they were right.
That's awesome. And I love it. I mean, some days you have a lot of confidence. You show up in like the muscle suit and the bone suit and all that.
That is actually a funny story that I used to dress up in the muscle suit, right? And I used to walk into the classroom wearing the muscle suit. And then there was this time that I basically got before the class started. I got there like 7 minutes earlier or so. And I have, the students that took the class with me before, that they decide to stick around, that I call them anatomy ambassadors. And they are there to inspire students to learn, to help them learn. They're all my right arms. They are my extensions. And we divided the class, which are almost 300 students, into smaller groups. And each of them is in charge of one small group. So I got there and I need to set up the computer to start the class, but I need to also take out my clothes. And then one of my anatomy ambassadors, Kiana, she's like, just do it in front of the classroom. And I was like, are you kidding me? I'm not doing that. And she's like, just do it. And I was like, well, I'm running out of time, right? So I might as well do it. And then I started the class. So in one specific question, I was like, let me show you how it really works in the human body. When I did that, the students just went crazy. And of course, my anatomy ambassador, she was recording it.
That's hilarious. The students must have freaked out. So much fun. I'm going to shift gears a little bit. A&P instructors come from all different backgrounds, research, clinical, etc. And we all have our favorite topics. For me, I think it's neuromusculoskeletal. That's kind of what I really love teaching the most. It's my strongest topic. What is your favorite topic to teach in A&P?
Well, I love it all. I love it. Like, I love all the topics, but I think if I need to choose one, it would be the cardiovascular system. That was the topic I chose to give the class for when I applied for this position at FIU. I chose cardiovascular system, and I do so many activities that are so interesting for the students. We have a whole theater act, including the 300 students in the classroom, that each of them are a cardiomyocyte, and we make the heart contract, and every single time something goes wrong, we have a different cardiac arrhythmia. So it's a lot of fun. So cardiovascular system it really has a special place in my heart.
That is a good one. I also did cardiovascular when I applied for my job
Nice.
20 plus years ago. It looks like your students are very successful in your class. And this is a course that nationwide has a 40% failure rate. So what tips do you have for students on being successful in A&P?
The first day of class, I tell my students, until the semester is over, you will sleep, breathe, and eat anatomy. You will have no other option. And even if you don't want it, that's what will happen. You need to dedicate time. There is no way you can learn anatomy, and you'll learn to love it. Everything is hard until it becomes easy. But the only way to become easy is if you put the time to learn it. In anatomy, you are learning a vocabulary and how to use that vocabulary, everything associated with vocabulary. And just learning a vocabulary is difficult. And I tell them, for you to learn a new language, the easiest way is if you move to the specific country that talks that language. And what I'm asking you this semester is to move to our little country of anatomy. It's an anatomy world, and you will need to dedicate time. Time management is essential because usually they don't take just my class, they take so many classes at the same time, right? So time management is essential. They need to have this drive to want to learn. And I do the best I can to inspire them to make connections. I make connections with their everyday life. And we have so many different activities that really incorporate the different learning styles. And what I offer them from the beginning is I have every single lecture recorded, my videos of teaching them, right? And now I have the book that also I wrote to help them learn. We have different resources that if you think you learn better by watching the video, if you think you learn better by just listening to me several times, if you think you learn better by reading the book, you choose your method, but you need to dedicate time.
I'm glad you brought up the book because I was going to ask about that. You have this anatomy survival guide. Could you tell us a little bit about that? Like what inspired you to write it? What is it? How do students get it?
So right now it's only available to my students.
Okay.
And I wrote it out of desperation for my students. So it turned out that I was going to teach Summer A 2024, which is I would teach the whole anatomy. I don't take anything out. And instead of being 16 weeks, it was 6 weeks. And when I realized that, I freaked out for my students because it is a lot. It is a lot. And then I decided I need to have something that can help people that learn reading. I need to have something that give my students what I need them to learn, which is the foundation for them to be able to move on afterwards. And then they just learn everything else. If I teach you how to learn anatomy, you'll be able to just add on top of that later on. And that's basically what I did. So I started writing the Anatomy Survival Guide on beginning of January. And I submitted it to copyright May 5th. So like every single night and weekends, I had no weekends. My husband would take my kids to the park to do whatever was interesting for them. And I would stay home every single weekend writing from 5 a.m. until 1 a.m. I was sleeping like 4 hours per night to get it done. But I did. And the students loved it. The way it's offered right now is through this company that basically you have access to the book and to all the resources for the semester. And when the semester is over, then the semester is over, right? And I was okay with that because usually students, the semester is over, they just trash everything. They don't want to see it anymore. But then it turns out that the semester was over in the summer and they were asking me, can I keep it? I want to have access to it. And then fall. And then, so they want to have the book. And I was like, guys, I was not predicting that. I thought you would just use it during the semester and then it would be over. So now I am trying to have this year membership or something, because I keep updating the book, as I told you before, right? Whatever I decide to do, I'm doing the best I can. So I keep adding this extra tip, which I call witty tips, this extra detail that will make it easier for you to learn this or that. That's how the Anatomy Survival Guide was born.
That's amazing. So is there anything on the horizon where people outside of FIU would be able to get it?
So I'm launching an online course now, August 27. It will be released worldwide, and it's at wittyanatomy.com. And then you have the whole human anatomy course, the same layout that I teach my students. And I also wrote now during summer the Anatomy Survival Guide Lab Edition, because I wanted to add that. That will be a great anatomy course to learn the foundation and then learn how to learn anatomy and fall in love with it.
So anyone can sign up for that online course?
Yes, anyone can sign up for that online course. It's not associated with any university. It's a course that if you want to learn anatomy from me, here is where you can do it.
Got it. Okay. So it's not a 4-credit course, but it's a great resource for students. I love it. I will put a link to that in the show notes so that it's going to launch August 27th, 2025.
Thank you.
No worries. Of course. Thank you for coming on.
This is the story of the one. As a custodial supervisor at a high school, he knows that during cold and flu season, germs spread fast. It's why he partners with Grainger to stay fully stocked on the products and supplies he needs, from tissues to disinfectants to floor scrubbers. All so that he can help students, staff, and teachers stay healthy and focused. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
I want to ask about something I read about recently, that you don't have office hours, you have happy hours.
Yes.
So that sounds like a lot of fun. It sounds a little dangerous, but I'm guessing you probably keep it pretty safe. So could you tell me how your office hours became happy hours, and what is that?
Sure. So I love my happy hours. And at the beginning of the semester, I always tell students, who goes to office hours? And they always look at me, and out of almost 300 students, maybe I have 5 that raise their hands, right? And I was like, I don't have office hours because that's not nice. And no one attends. You know, I don't have office hours because I have happy hours. I'm so happy to see you there. Please don't leave me alone. And then they want to check it out, right? Okay, what is this crazy lady? She's really interesting. And she's telling me she has happy hours and she'll be happy to see me there. Let me check it out. And even my ambassadors, that in the first day of class, I tell them to introduce themselves and give the students tips. They tell them, you need to go to happy hours. You need to go to happy hours. And students go. And I have my happy hours in the lab. And I have almost 40 students in the lab with me. They all studying, engaging, touching the models, really asking me questions, asking each other questions. So it's amazing. Now, how it started, that's the answer for your question. I attend the Gateway Survey at FIU, which basically is where several professors at FIU get together, and we go over data collected from students. And the students that took my class at the end of the semester, I asked them to complete the survey, and I have different views if they like the theater acts, if they like the happy hours, if they felt I was accessible and that they learned from the teaching style, what would they would suggest to improve it, and so on. And since it is anonymous, the students are very sincere in their answers. So we go to this Gateway Survey workshop with the other professors, and they place us in different rooms, breakout rooms, because the workshop is done over Zoom. And I was in this breakout room with a professor from chemistry. And she was saying, students don't attend my office hours, and I don't know what to do. And I was like, I never had this problem. Students always attended my office hours. And that's the reason that instead of having my office hours in my office, which I used to have, and my office fits like 3 people, and I had a line of students waiting outside the door, I moved to the lab, which is a dry lab, and now I can have them all there. So I never had this issue with office hours attendance. And I told her, maybe you rebrand it. Why, instead of calling office hours, call happy hours and tell them you'll be happy to see them. And she like, oh yeah, I might consider it. And then the workshop ended. And at that time, I was teaching with another professor. We co-taught human anatomy, Lisa Bring. And I told Lisa, I gave this idea. Can we please change our office hours to happy hours? Because I really like it. And Lisa, she's on board with lots of my creativity. And then she's like, sure, we are rebranding it then. And we just did it. And it was a great success. And it was so successful that we even published the paper, Rebranding Office Hours. And I advise everyone that is willing to have several students in their office hours really rebrand to happy hours.
I love it. That needs to be your workshop proposal for the HAPS conference next year. Rebranding your office hours. Well, it sounds like a lot of fun. Dr. Benadusi, you have been really, really generous with your time. I can't thank you enough for joining me and sharing your experience and expertise with all the listeners. You are absolutely killing it in the classroom with A&P, and I wish there were more anatomy professors like you.
Thank you so much.
I can't thank you enough. You are more than welcome.
It was a great pleasure to be here, and anytime we can talk about different topics, and it was a lot of fun. This was really interesting. Thank you so much for having me here.
I really appreciate it. Is there anything else you want to share before we sign off?
So last week, I published another educational paper about active bodies, active minds, and I talk about active learning, which is essential, but I always add this movement style. I would like to encourage professors to start adding more movement in their classroom. Students really, really like it, and the outcome is amazing. So that would be my last 2 cents.
All right, I just took a quick little note. I will find that paper and I will also post that in the show notes so that people can read it.
Thank you.
Well, thank you again. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. It was a pleasure.
Is she fun or what? Her students are so lucky to have her for A&P, and you can also benefit from her innovative teaching techniques by following her on Instagram, TikTok, or checking out her online course on August 27th, 2025. I put links to all of it in the show notes so you can find it easily. Thank you again, Dr. Benadusi. Keep up the amazing work you're doing for students around the world. Okay, without further ado, let's finish up the female reproductive system. As I've mentioned in the past, the gamete of biological females is called the oocyte, which develops inside an ovarian follicle. The production of an oocyte is called oogenesis. It also uses meiosis, just like spermatogenesis did, but it's a little different than what we saw with the males. The development of the ovarian follicle is called folliculogenesis. Since they take place at the same time, we're going to talk about them together. Oogenesis actually begins long before a biological female is born. However, it is completed during the reproductive years when it is driven by monthly hormone secretions that result in the maturation and release of a secondary oocyte from the ovary. So let's start with the embryonic development and where those oocytes are coming from. By the 6th week of development post-conception, diploid stem cells called oogonia begin to develop. Oogonia multiply via mitosis until about the 5th month of fetal development, at which point they remain dormant until just before birth. Those oocytes live inside ovarian follicles, which play a key role in the maturation and release of the oocyte, as well as in the secretion of hormones that regulate the menstrual cycle of the uterus. As many as 7 million oogonia are formed. They develop into diploid cells called primary oocytes and begin dividing via meiosis I. Remember, meiosis has 2 rounds of division. Meiosis I and meiosis II. Meiosis I is where we're going to see the crossing over of chromatids during prophase I. I do have a whole episode that covers meiosis, and that is episode 69. So if you're not sure about meiosis, go back to episode 69, listen to that, and then come back, because I'm not going to rehash over it again. I'm just going to let you know that oogenesis includes meiosis. All right, so once again, there are 7 million oogonia. They develop into diploid cells called primary oocytes and begin dividing via meiosis I. All this happens before birth, and the majority of primary oocytes don't even make it that far, as they degenerate in a process called atresia. No new oocytes can form after birth, and due to continued atresia, only about 200,000 are left when the biological female reaches puberty. The follicle that houses an oogonium is called a primordial follicle. And that oogonium will develop into the primary oocyte inside that primordial follicle. The primordial follicle is surrounded by a single layer of squamous cells called follicular cells. Beginning with puberty, each month between 20 and 25 primordial follicles are activated to continue their development toward being a mature follicle. But they're not going to be selected from for that month's ovulation. This is a misconception that is commonly held in anatomy and physiology. We don't start maturation at the beginning of the month and then one of those becomes the ovulated oocyte. That is not how it happens. The process of folliculogenesis takes about 290 days. So even though every month we're starting the development of 20 to 25 new primordial follicles, those follicles have 290 days of development before they're even considered for ovulation. And only one of them actually gets to ovulate. The remaining follicles die. About 140 days after this activation, primordial follicles become primary follicles, which are more than twice the size and surrounded by a single layer of cuboidal follicular cells, not squamous. These cells will soon develop receptors for the anterior pituitary's follicle-stimulating hormone. Most of the primary follicles contain a primary oocyte that has entered prophase I of the first meiotic division. However, the meiosis I of primary oocytes is not completed until the day of ovulation, which is when one of the 20 to 25 originally activated follicles ruptures and releases its oocyte. About 170 days after activation, the primary follicle grows and develops into a secondary follicle. At 200 micrometers, it's now twice the size of the primary follicle. The follicular cells have formed into multiple layers now and are now called granulosa cells. Within the follicle, the 120 micrometer primary oocyte is surrounded by the zona pellucida, which is composed of a glycoprotein gel. The granulosa cells are surrounded by the thick theca folliculi, which receives nutrients, hormones, and cholesterol for the follicle via its rich blood supply. About 60 days later, with about 60 days left before ovulation, the secondary follicle develops into a tertiary follicle. Granulosa cells secrete follicular fluid, separating them into 2 layers. One that is bound to the inner follicular wall, and one, now called the cumulus oophorus, that surrounds the primary oocyte and anchors it to the wall of the follicle. The innermost cells of the cumulus oophorus form a protective layer around the zona pellucida called the corona radiata. The fluid-filled cavity this process produces is called the antrum. The final stage of folliculogenesis is the mature follicle, the follicle that ovulates. About 20 days before ovulation, one tertiary follicle becomes more sensitive to FSH than the others and develops into the dominant follicle, measuring about 5 millimeters across. The remaining non-dominant follicles degenerate, and then their chance is done. They don't get another chance next month. About 5 days before ovulation, which is when we release the oocyte, the dominant follicle becomes the pre-ovulatory follicle, which measures about 20 millimeters across. That's 2 centimeters. Slightly wider than a US dime. Finally, on the day of ovulation, this singular, mature follicle can be as large as 30 millimeters across, taking up the entire length of the ovary itself. Only the primary oocyte of the mature follicle completes meiosis I, resulting in a haploid secondary oocyte and the first polar body, which degenerates and dies. So now we have the difference between oogenesis and spermatogenesis. With spermatogenesis, meiosis I resulted in 2 haploid cells. Now we're getting 1 haploid secondary oocyte and what we call the first polar body. Only the secondary oocyte will go through meiosis II. The first polar body does not. With spermatogenesis, we had both haploid cells entering meiosis II. Not the case here. Big difference. The secondary oocyte detaches from the follicular wall as the mature follicle fills with fluid until it ruptures. The follicular fluid, the secondary oocyte, and its cumulus oophorus are expelled from the follicle into the pelvic cavity and in most cases taken up by the fimbriae of the uterine tube. That is ovulation. When that follicle ruptures and the secondary oocyte is ejected into the pelvic cavity and then potentially into the uterine tube, which is usually what happens, that is ovulation. It happens about 14 days after the onset of the menstrual cycle. That secondary oocyte, which still has 2 chromatids for each of its 23 chromosomes, begins meiosis II. But it stops during the metaphase II phase. So it doesn't complete meiosis II. It just goes until metaphase II. A little less than halfway done. And it doesn't finish meiosis II unless it's fertilized by a spermatozoan. So the only oocytes that complete meiosis are the ones that are fertilized. If the secondary oocyte is not fertilized by a sperm, does not complete meiosis II, and it degenerates and dies. If it is fertilized by a sperm, it completes meiosis II, resulting in an ovum, or egg cell, and a second polar body, which is also discarded. Again, we don't want 2 eggs coming out of this, we just fertilize one. The ovum now has 23 chromosomes with 1 chromatid each. But so does the sperm, who just fertilized it by taking the head of the sperm and putting it inside the oocyte cell. These 2 sets of 23 chromatids, which are full chromosomes, will form 1 diploid nucleus in a cell that is on its way to becoming an embryo. Those chromosomes, the nucleus of the oocyte and the nucleus of the spermatozoan, will come together as the nuclei fuse. We actually call them pronuclei at that point. Those pronuclei fuse together to form 1 full diploid nucleus. It's a lot different than spermatogenesis, right? I mean, there's a lot of similarities, but there's some big time differences. So make sure you get that down, because if you're taking A&P, I can guarantee you some of your test questions are going to be about the differences between spermatogenesis and oogenesis. And they're really important. Okay, so now that we know how we're getting oocytes, how they're forming, how they're developing, now we're going to talk about regulating their release, their development, and making sure that the uterus is prepared to accept it if it becomes fertilized. For this, biological females have 2 concurrent monthly cycles. Together, we call them the sexual cycle. But it's really divided up into 2. The ovarian cycle, which is charged with releasing a secondary oocyte for a potential fertilization with a sperm cell, and the menstrual cycle, which has the responsibility of building up the internal wall of the uterus, the stratum functionalis of the endometrium, so that it can accept the implantation of a fertilized egg cell, which at that point will be an embryo. These are 2 separate cycles, the ovarian cycle and the menstrual cycle. We're going to start with the ovarian cycle, but they run at the same time. All right, so once again, the ovary prepares the release of a secondary oocyte while the uterus prepares to develop it into an embryo, eventually a fetus, and then a newborn. The sexual cycle, combined, averages about 28 days in length, but can actually vary from 20 to 45 days. Remember from the endocrine episodes that until the hypothalamus secretes gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which targets the anterior pituitary gland, none of this is going to happen. We're not going to get FSH and LH without the hypothalamus doing that. Remember, I have an episode specifically about the hypothalamus and pituitary. That is episode 35. You can review that if you're not really sure what I'm talking about. The anterior pituitary gland secretes the gonadotropins, FSH and LH, and they target the ovary. The ovaries secrete estradiol and progesterone, which target the uterus. This hierarchy of control is called the hypothalamo-pituitary-ovarian axis. Keep in mind that the ovaries also exert positive and negative feedback controls over the hypothalamus and pituitary. The sexual cycle is 2 separate cycles happening simultaneously, like I mentioned earlier, one in the ovaries and one in the uterus. We're focusing on the ovarian cycle, which has 3 phases to it: the follicular phase, the ovulatory phase, and the luteal phase. The first is the follicular phase. It begins on the first day of menstruation when the stratum functionalis of the uterus is shed and ends with ovulation. This is considered day 1 to day 14. This is the most variable of the phases. This is why you have some people with less than 28 days, some people with more than 28 days. The follicular phase is the one that's the most variable. So it's difficult to reliably predict the exact date of ovulation. To best understand this phase, you have to really have an idea of folliculogenesis, which is why I did that first. Follicle-stimulating hormone, FSH, stimulates continued growth of the 20 to 25 tertiary follicles that are ready that month. FSH stimulates the granulosa cells of the antral follicles to secrete estradiol, which makes the dominant follicle more sensitive to FSH, luteinizing hormone, or LH, and estradiol itself. Estradiol also inhibits the hypothalamus' secretion of gonadotropin-releasing hormone. In turn, the anterior pituitary gland secretes less FSH but more LH. The dominant follicle supply of FSH receptors helps it become the only pre-ovulatory follicle, while the remaining follicles degenerate. About a day before ovulation, estradiol secretion from the ovary influences a large increase in LH and smaller increases in FSH. LH induces the primary oocyte to complete meiosis I, resulting in a haploid secondary oocyte. We also have the first polar body at this point. Then the follicle swells with follicular fluid as enzyme secretions weaken the follicular wall. At this point, we start to see the formation of a stigma, which is a nipple-like projection appearing on the surface of the follicle as the mature follicle gets ready to burst open. The next phase is ovulation, which typically takes place around day 14 of the ovarian cycle. Follicular fluid leaks from the stigma for a minute or two before the follicle actually bursts, as the fluid, secondary oocyte, and cumulus oophores leak out into the pelvic cavity. The uterine tube prepares itself for ovulation. It swells with edema. Its fimbriae wrap around the ovary, and its cilia create mild waves in the peritoneal fluid. These actions help the secondary oocyte and its cumulus oophorus enter the uterine tube. However, that's not always the case. Oftentimes, oocytes stay in the pelvic cavity and die there. On some really rare occasions, a spermatozoan makes it all the way through the uterine tube, out the infundibulum, into the pelvic cavity, and fertilizes a pelvic oocyte. If that fertilization becomes a zygote and an embryo, it could implant in the pelvic cavity. At this point, we have an ectopic pregnancy. That cannot survive. You cannot harbor an embryo outside the uterus. That's why we call it ectopic, meaning that it is where it's not supposed to be. And it is not survivable by the embryo or the biological female that's pregnant. So it has to be terminated if the body doesn't take care of it on its own. It cannot be transferred to the uterus. There's a myth out there that that can happen. That does not happen. Medically, that is not possible. Now, it's important to note that the ovulation is stimulated by luteinizing hormone. So the actual rupture of the follicle is stimulated by luteinizing hormones, which spikes in the blood at about 9 hours before ovulation. This is why you can use ovulation tests. If you're trying to get pregnant and you're trying to find out when you're ovulating, you can test yourself for luteinizing hormone to know when you're going to ovulate. Okay, the luteal or post-ovulatory phase takes place right after ovulation and lasts from day 15 to day 28, ending with the onset of the next menstruation. If there is no successful fertilization and eventual pregnancy, the ruptured follicle collapses and bleeds into its own antrum. The combination of coagulated blood and follicular cells fills the antrum as the ruptured follicle becomes known as the corpus luteum. So now you might know why luteinizing hormone is called what it is, because it luteinizes the follicle, turns it into the corpus luteum. LH stimulates the corpus luteum to continue growing and to secrete rising levels of estradiol and progesterone. Progesterone is the main hormone helping maintain the uterine wall in case of fertilization. Around day 22, if there is no pregnancy, the corpus luteum begins a process of involution, meaning it shrinks, shrivels up, and by day 26 becomes the corpus albicans, which is non-functional scar tissue, meaning progesterone and estradiol levels decline. Okay, so that's the ovarian cycle. The other part of the sexual cycle is the menstrual cycle, a complex and orchestrated series of events preparing the uterus for a possible pregnancy each month. There are 4 phases to the menstrual cycle. In order, they are the menstrual, proliferative, secretory, and premenstrual phases. The menstrual cycle is also known as the uterine cycle. Day 1 of the menstrual cycle is considered to be the first day of the vaginal discharge associated with menstruation, also known as the menstrual period. So the menstrual cycle begins with the menstrual phase, which corresponds to the shedding of the endometrium from a non-pregnant uterus. Remember, it's the stratum functionalis of the endometrium that's actually shed. The stratum basale starts producing a new stratum functionalis. The hormonal changes that occur during the concurrent ovarian cycle trigger this process that lasts about 5 days. The menstrual fluid, or menses, that is discharged consists of blood, serous fluid, and the epithelial cells of the endometrium stratum functionalis. The next phase is the proliferative phase, which begins with the end of menstruation and lasts until ovulation. So it's about day 5 to 14 or so. The proliferative phase coincides with the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle. It marks the restoration and regrowth of the endometrial lining that was shed during menstruation. FSH levels during the follicular phase of the ovarian cycle stimulate the ovarian follicles to produce increasing amounts of estrogen. Estrogen stimulates the proliferation of endometrial cells and blood vessels. The stratum functionalis of the endometrium thickens and becomes enriched with nutrients to support a potential embryo. Estrogen also stimulates an increase in progesterone receptors in the endometrial cells. Day 15 until day 26 is the secretory phase. It corresponds to the luteal phase of the ovarian cycle. During this phase, the endometrial lining becomes highly vascular and glandular, preparing for embryo implantation. Following ovulation, the corpus luteum produces progesterone, which plays a crucial role in the secretory transformation of the endometrium. It stimulates the secretion of glycogen by endometrial glands and promotes their growth and coiling. These glands secrete nutrients that nourish a potential embryo. Progesterone also causes dilation of blood vessels in the endometrium, enhancing blood flow and nutrient supply to the uterine lining. The premenstrual or ischemic phase occurs if there is no pregnancy and the corpus luteum degenerates. Without the corpus luteum, there is a decline in estrogen and progesterone levels, causing the blood vessels in the endometrium to constrict, decreasing blood flow. Blood vessels that supply the myometrium also constrict, resulting in the pain associated with premenstrual cramps. Remember, myometrium is muscle. The lack of hormonal support and reduced blood flow leads to the disintegration of the endometrial tissue. Consequently, stroma, blood vessels, and the endometrial glands break down. The blood, serous fluid, and dead epithelial cells of the stratum functionalis accumulate in the uterine cavity, forming the menstrual fluid that is shed during menstruation. If there is a fertilization of the secondary oocyte, the eventual embryo secretes a hormone called human chorionic gonadotropin, or HCG. HCG targets the corpus luteum and inhibits involution or degeneration. So the corpus luteum continues to secrete progesterone, allowing the stratum functionalis to continue thickening. The premenstrual and menstrual phases are inhibited, so the embryo has a place to implant and develop. So the menstruation does not take place, hence the term missing a period. HCG is the hormone that over-the-counter pregnancy tests are looking for. So when you test your urine with it, you're looking for the breakdown products of human chorionic gonadotropin. So the sexual cycle is the simultaneous events in the ovaries and uterus, so a biological female can release a gamete for fertilization and support its growth and development into a newborn offspring. One of the most common questions I get during this unit from my students is about oral contraceptives or birth control pills and how do they work. And there's a couple of answers to that. So I figured, why not address it here on the podcast before someone asks that question? So when we talk about oral contraceptives or birth control pills or, quote, the pill, end quote, we're really referring to synthetic versions of ovarian hormones, estrogen and progesterone, and they are taken in a daily pill to prevent pregnancy. These pills come in two major varieties: combined oral contraceptives, which contain both estrogen and progestin, and the so-called mini pill, which contains only progestin. Although their formulations differ, they all act on the reproductive system in several coordinated ways to ensure pregnancy doesn't occur. The most important effect of combined oral contraceptives is the suppression of ovulation. Normally, the hypothalamus releases pulses of gonadotropin-releasing hormone, which drive the anterior pituitary to secrete FSH and LH, which we know. FSH stimulates follicular development, and the mid-cycle surge in LH is what triggers ovulation. By providing steady levels of estrogen and progestin is a synthetic form of progesterone, oral contraceptives dampen the hypothalamic pituitary-ovarian axis through negative feedback. This blunts FSH and LH secretion, and crucially, it prevents the LH surge. Without that surge, there's no ovulation. So no egg is actually released during that month if you are taking the pills. In addition to preventing ovulation, oral contraceptives also act on the cervix. Progestins increase the viscosity or thickness of cervical mucus, transforming it from a thin, watery secretion, which is easy for sperm to swim through, into a thick, sticky barrier. Under these conditions, sperm have a lot of difficulty penetrating into the upper reproductive tract, or uterus, and uterine tubes, making fertilization even less likely should there be an ovulation. Another layer of protection comes from changes within the endometrium. In the natural cycle, we know that progesterone secreted after ovulation prepares the endometrium to support the implantation of a fertilized ovum. But when someone takes oral contraceptives, the endometrium is continuously exposed to progestin in relatively low doses. This produces an atrophic, thin endometrium that is not suitable for implantation. Even if a fertilized ovum were present, it would be far less likely to implant successfully. There may also be effects on the uterine tubes, where the hormones can reduce ciliary activity and muscular contractility, further interfering with gamete transport. While this is a minor contribution, it adds to the overall contraceptive effect. Now, not all pills work the same way. Combined oral contraceptives rely heavily on ovulation suppression as their main mechanism, which is supported by the mucus and endometrial effects. The progestin-only pill, on the other hand, does not consistently block ovulation. Its primary defense is the thickening of cervical mucus and the creation of an inhospitable endometrium. Because of this, the mini pill must be taken at the same time every day without the flexibility that the combined pills allow. It's often chosen in women who cannot safely take estrogen. For example, women over 35 who smoke, those with a history of thromboembolism, or those who suffer from migraine. A thromboembolism is a blood clot that is traveling through the circulatory system. Now, there's other clinical benefits to oral contraceptives that are not about birth control. People who take combined oral contraceptives have a reduced risk of ovarian and endometrial cancers. Cycles become more predictable, menstrual flow is lighter, and dysmenorrhea is less severe. Dysmenorrhea would be an abnormal menstrual cycle. Some women also see improvement in acne because of the androgen-modulating effects of estrogen and progestin combinations. Of course, no medication is without risks. Estrogen-containing pills increase the risk of venous thromboembolism because of their influence on clotting factors. For this reason, they are contraindicated in women with a history of clots, estrogen-dependent tumors, severe liver disease, or uncontrolled hypertension or high blood pressure. Smokers over 35 have a particularly higher cardiovascular risk. So that's why we want to avoid it in those individuals. Common side effects include breakthrough bleeding, nausea, breast tenderness, and mood changes, though these are often mild, and they improve over time, so you kind of adapt to the presence of the hormones. So, to sum it up, oral contraceptives prevent pregnancy through a multi-pronged approach. Their dominant action, especially in combined formulations, is to shut down ovulation by suppressing the hypothalamic pituitary ovarian axis. They also thicken cervical mucus to block sperm entry and create an endometrium that resists implantation. Progestin-only pills lean more heavily on the cervical mucus and endometrial effects, while combined pills mostly rely on suppressing ovulation. Together, these approaches make oral contraceptives one of the most effective and widely used methods of reversible birth control in medicine. And as you can tell now, by suppressing ovulation and blocking sperm from getting into the uterus and uterine tubes, this is not a contraception that stimulates the termination of a fertilization. This prevents the fertilization. Okay, so once again, I want to thank my amazing guest, Dr. Paula Benad from Florida International University. Please check her out. I have posted links to anywhere you can find her and just about everything she does in the show notes. You can find her on Instagram at Witty Anatomy. She is amazing. You should see what she's doing in the classroom. It is fun. It is energetic. It is promoting learning of anatomy and physiology. Please check her out. And thank you once again, Dr. Benad, for joining me. Also, thank you to the listener. I can't do this without you. Thank you so much. I hope this podcast is helping you get your B or better in A&P. And I'll talk to you next time. Anatomy and Physiology Bit by Bit is a production of Minus 55 Media and is hosted by the Believe Network. Please take the time to rate my show and leave a review. You can also check out the content I post on Instagram and YouTube as @StudentHelp4AP. That's the number 4 AP. Special thanks to my family, Bucks County Community College, and McGraw-Hill Education, where your instructor can find Anatomy and Physiology Digital Suite, my low-cost tutor video-based digital learning solution for anatomy and physiology currently being used at several colleges and universities. If your instructor isn't using Digital Suite, let them know about it. The link is in the show notes.